an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Researchers on a Mission, ROAM Radio. That's right, you heard it correctly. Plural, researchers. The reason being is now this is extended show. I have with me my international co-host straight from the UK, Johnny Webb. Johnny, say hi to everybody.
Hey guys, how you doing? Good evening to you all.
Excellent, Johnny. Today is going to be an excellent show, as always, and especially because not only are we speaking with someone who's been a great inspiration for me to get to where I'm at, to be actually speaking on the radio and speaking on these topics, but we're also joined with somebody who everybody should be familiar, who's one of the coolest people I know, has one of the biggest hearts I know, very kind, and is doing great work in terms of getting the truth out there. He is filmmaker Jeremy Kenyon Lockyer Corbell. Mr. Corbell, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Hey, Dr. J. How you doing?
I am doing great. Always good when I speak to you. You are the man. You've been making several films. You are responsible for the Truth Embargo film. Recently, we were talking about what you've been working on, the citizen hearing videos that are finally available for everybody. And also, when you speak at the 2015 International UFO Congress, you will be releasing the trailer of Immaculate Deception. And that movie is about the godfather of conspiracy, John Lear. Mr. Lear, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. J.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to speak to you, just like it is with Jeremy. And of course, we never get enough time, and that's why you are one of the most requested people of all time. With that being said, why don't you, Jeremy and John and Mr. Lear, speak real quick about Immaculate Deception, since I announced the trailer.
Yeah, well, really simply, Immaculate Deception is a film that I started with John a number of years ago. All of my interest in this field started with my interest in John Lear. John was very outspoken, back in 1989 in particular, when George Knapp broke the story that John was talking about, and then they brought Bob Lazar forward into the forefront. All of that is what weaponized my curiosity. All of that is what made me interested in this topic. So it was kind of like a childhood dream to be able to meet up with John and, ask him questions and get direct answers. And Immaculate Deception is kind of what naturally grew from that. John, after some time, allowed me to start filming with him, and we have documented a variety of aspects of John's life, ideas, philosophies, a lot of which people haven't heard before. So it's a long-term project, but we have, 99.9% of it filmed. And essentially at this moment, I'm happy to announce that, in February, I'll be releasing the actual trailer to Immaculate Deception, a teaser trailer, at the 2015 International UFO Congress. So, hey, look, just like you, John has been an inspiration to me in my imagination and allowing me to understand this wild world of ufology. And that's the inspiration for Immaculate Deception, is getting a little bit closer to the truth and at least inquiring about why John believes the things that John does. Because the one thing I can say about John Lear is that he truly believes the things that he says. He's not crazy. Well, that's for you to decide, but he's not lying, and he's not making things up. John is a straight shooter, and he's telling you what he believes to be real and true, and it's up to you to decide if you agree.
And, of course, John Lear is really a walking encyclopedia of tons of information, not just for ufology, but pretty much everything, things that the CIA has done, 9/11, bases, underground military bases, just so much information we could never, ever get it all in the same show. And I'm glad you mentioned 1989 because for me, the journey began in 1984 when I first, prior to that, I just knew we were never alone. 1984, I saw my first documentary where Stanton Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel Sr., I believe it was in 1978. 85, I saw a sighting, and then, of course, 89, I saw Mr. Lear on a lecture. I think at the time, though, I don't think, John Lear, you mentioned Bob Lazar's name, but you were talking about someone who was there reverse engineering, and then shortly thereafter, I remember everything blew up with you, with George Knapp, and, of course, Bob Lazar. Now, I have tons of things that I want to ask you about, and I know we've revisited this several times, but briefly, real quick, since this is a new slot, new time for new listeners, I was hoping if we could just for a few short minutes go to what happened in 1989 with your meeting with Gene Huff and the now infamous Bob Lazar.
Bob, on a Tuesday, March 21st, 1989, he asked me, he said, do you want to go see one of the saucers I'm working on test fly? And I said, yeah, how do we do that? He said, we kick in we go to the northeast dirt road that goes into Groom Lake, and we go just to the border, the BLM border, so we aren't trespassing on the Air Force land. And they usually test fly about 9 o'clock on Wednesday nights, and we'll just see what we can see. So we got my old motor home, and me and Gene and Bob's wife, and I think that was it. There might have been, yeah, that was it. So we drove up there 9 o'clock, and we get there about 8:45. I start unloading the Celestron 8 telescope, which is a very powerful telescope. And about 9 o'clock, as I'm still setting it up, they look up and they see a bright light flitting to and forth and going up and down, backwards and forwards, and at some time disappearing. And it was really interesting. And then I got the telescope set up, and as the object started to descend behind the hills, I got a good view of it in the Celestron scope. As you know, it's very hard to line up a moving object in a powerful telescope. But anyway, I got it lined up, watched it descend. It was a discolored, bright kind of goldish color, and it was coming down, and as it descended, it looked like it was radiating something was flowing off it, gold pieces of something. And I said, here, Gene, quick, take a look. And as I said, for Gene to take a look, I accidentally hooked my foot around one of the tripod legs and moved it out of position. And by that time, it had disappeared. So we sat there and talked about it for a while, and really interesting to see a flying saucer that Bob had told us was going to be there the day before. There was no doubt that it was the one that he was working on. And the next Wednesday night, a week from then, I was on a trip with American Transair, so I couldn't go. But Bob and Gene and Jim Taliani and some others went, and even got a better view because it came a lot closer. The following Wednesday, which was April 6th of 1989, me and Bob, Gene, Bob's wife, and Bob's wife's sister went up, and just as we got close to the border, we saw some headlights heading down the hill. Looked like they were coming after us. So we turned around and headed back towards the highway, and it looked like we weren't going to outrun them. So we stopped. Bob said, I'm going to run out in the desert, and you guys come pick me up later. I started setting up my telescope, and these guys came to a stop, all got out, and as Bob said yesterday on the History Channel, it looked like an army of guards. And they said, what are you guys doing? And I said, well, we're just, looking through the telescope at the stars. And they said, well, why were you running away? And I said, well, we thought that we might have interrupted some kind of a drug thing. And he said, well, no, this is no drug thing, and we need to see some ID. And so we showed him some ID and driver's licenses and Social Security. And they said, well, we can't kick you out of here because this is BLM land, but we can make it awful difficult for you if you stay. And so they turned around, and we thought left, but as it turned out, they had just gone about 100 yards down the road, turned around, and were filming us in infrared, and also were recording our conversation. We started joking around, and finally Bob came out of the desert. We talked a little bit. Then we got in the car and left. And as we got to the highway, the Lincoln County sheriff was there waiting for us, and he had the lights and siren going, and in the loudspeakers told us to get out of the car and put our hands up against the roof, and which we did, and we were there for a good hour while the sheriff tried to get us to. He had two questions. He said, one, he says, why, when you're here now, there's 5 people, and when security stopped you in the desert, there was only 4. And he said, and also I want to know where the gun is. And when Bob went out into the desert, he took his 9mm, and when he got back, he made the unfortunate comment that he had it aimed at those guys, and if they tried to come after him, he was going to shoot. But anyway, after about an hour, the sheriff said, look, I don't know why I'm being told to do this, but I'm being told to let you guys go and to tell you never to come back. So we left and went home. The next day, when Bob was supposed to go to work, he got a call from his boss, whose name was Dennis Mariana, and told Bob not to go down to McCarran, where Bob usually got the airplane to go up to Area 51, said that he would pick him up. Dennis drove by his house and made Bob drive up in his car up to Creech Air Force Base, which is the old Indian Springs Air Force Base, and is the head of all the security for the test site up there. And they got up there, and Bob was taken out of the car with a gun in his ear and said, now, Bob, when we gave you this clearance and we showed you all our saucers, it didn't mean you were supposed to tell all of your friends about our flying saucers. Now, do you want to work here or not? So Bob was non-committal, and at that time they told him some information that they had found out while listening. They had all of our telephones tapped, me, Gene's, and Bob's, and they told him that his wife had been carrying on an affair that Bob was not privy to at that time, and they told him that when he got his affair straightened out, that they would consider having him come back to work. So he left. Creech came back, and in the next few days, it was just unbelievable what was going on. It was he told me and Gene all what was going on up at the test site and about the saucers and all the rest of the stuff. And eventually we got to give the information to George Knapp, who put it on the 5 o'clock news in May. And from there on, it went. It just went worldwide with all the information, and it's just unbelievable. George Knapp gave a talk here at the MUFON conference a couple of months ago, and said that it was just how unbelievable how it expanded all around the world and how interested people were.
I would think they would be interested because this is the story of all of mankind, the biggest secret ever that's been perpetuated by not only our government, by the globe. Now, let me ask you this. The reason Bob came to you first, based on the last few times we spoke, was because you weren't believing what Gene was talking about. And I guess neither was Bob until he actually saw one of these craft himself. You ended up becoming a believer after Bob came to you first. What other conspiracies did you start to believe, or even back this up a second? Did you even consider the fact that there were flying saucers before Bob Lazar told you about them?
Yeah, I want to chime in, John. I can't wait for you to answer that, John, because John was talking about this way before that. John's the one with George Knapp who kind of went into this whole field prior to any of this stuff. So, John, tell him what's up, and I just wanted to chime in, you know?
Absolutely, Jimmy, anytime.
I was on George Knapp's Channel 8 information show ran on Saturday or on Sunday morning. And do you remember, Jeremy, what the name of that show was?
On the record.
Anyway, it ran 3 times, and each time I told them that there was saucers up there, that there was aliens. There's no doubt about it. And George didn't believe it. Neither did anybody else. And it took them, everybody, even after Bob came out, well, they believe about the flying saucers, but they wouldn't believe about the aliens. And of course, Stan Friedman, who is the major debunker in most of this, I saw his show on the History Channel last night, and the last words that he said on the History Channel was, there's no doubt about it, Bob Lazar is a scam, is a con man. But he's not a con man. He did see it. He did work on it. It's all true. What Friedman would say about why he would say that, I don't know. If I ever get to talk to him, I'd like to say, he's always said that I asked Bob Lazar a simple physics question, and he wasn't even able to ask that. And so I want to know what the physics question was that he asked Bob, because I've never been able to get Stan Friedman to come forth on it. And also I want to know, other than the fact that his records disappeared, which doesn't make him a con man, why he thinks he's a con man when there's so much information available, including the information about element 115, which has now come to be true. It's a heavy element. It comes up after 113 and 114 were found, and then 115 was found, and they're in an isolated area of heavy elements, which are extremely heavy, and has some other properties that they weren't aware of, but they found out were true.
Johnny Webb's got a question for you, but prior to this, let me just throw a quick comment. First of all, if you ever want to ask Stanton Friedman, would be more than happy to set it up, whether on air or off air. He comes on the show very often. Now, I disagree with Stanton Friedman with regards to what he says about Lazar. One of the reasons Stan says is, well, I saw no college record, and he was a C student in high school. Well, it's easy for the government to make your records disappear, A, and B, I was a C student, a C-minus student in high school, and then I went off to get a doctorate. So I don't care what they say about being a bad high school student. That does not dictate what you'll do in college, university, and then, of course, your furthering education. Johnny, go ahead and ask the question.
I think John Lear also asks a really good question. I mean, John Lear is simply asking, why do you call him a con man? What are the specifics that make you say that? And that's what I love about, John Lear's approach to things. He's not passing judgment. He just wants to know the evidence.
Agreed. And like
Johnny
I said,
Webb in London here, and good evening to Jeremy and to John Lear, both of you. But the question to John Lear is who are Wackenhut Security? I understand we have Halliburton's, we have Wackenhut. And my understanding is they're the security firms that have the white vans or jeeps that sit up on the ridge and make sure that no one comes in and out. But my question is how comes these people aren't answerable to Congress or, to the Disclosure Project? We've got people talking about UFOs. We've got government saying they don't know anything about it. But we have a company here called Wackenhut that's the security for this company. So who's paying Wackenhut? Who's employing them? And why isn't this being addressed?
The answer to that is Wackenhut is employed by the United States, the test site, which is its own country, has its own rules, has its own rules, old Congress, own people that it answers to, and has nothing to do with the United States of America or the American Congress or Senate.
I believe you're absolutely right, and I don't know if I mentioned this before. I know I told you, Mr. Corbell, I have a friend who served in Vietnam as a Navy SEAL from 65 to 69, and then after that he was a mercenary from 70 to 71. He said every mission when he was a SEAL, most of them were extract or exterminate for people that were captured, specifically pilots that had intel, and of course other missions. But he said every mission in his Navy SEAL career came down from a CIA handler, when he became a mercenary, the checks changed from U.S. Treasury to a private corporation, but the same CIA handler was the one giving them the orders. Same person from the military, then going on to private, acting as the official government. And his mercenary missions, both times, were to bring giant cargo ships full of cocaine. And obviously this always proved the theory to me that the government was involved in dealing drugs essentially on large scales to fund black operations. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, and also the secret government was responsible for a group who were based over in Okinawa, and as they'd find out this information on the monsters that were appearing in Southeast Asia and have been noted all around the world, they would be called up and sent by actual saucers into Vietnam to locate and see if they could kill or capture these monsters. They were about 7 feet tall, 8 feet tall. They had wings. They had human-type faces, but they were extremely mean, and they did a lot of killing out there. Now, a lot of our what was all that bombs that they dropped that turned into fire? I just lost my
napalm.
Napalm. They dropped a lot of napalm over these parts where these monsters were, and they killed a lot of women and children indiscriminately on the basis that they were just after the monsters themselves, not the women and children. And all this is very secret, and it was put out in a book by Lou Baldwin. He's written 4 or 5 books. You can get them at Amazon.com or Lulu.com. And
when you say monsters, though, John, do you mean like in Asia the Nagas monsters, or the dragons, or how do you mean?
Yeah, monsters like's been found in Virginia. The flying, they call them Mothmen.
Well, I'm glad you opened up the store for monsters, because Kathleen Martin, Betty Hill's niece, who I'm sure you know, I had her on last night. We spoke about the similar things, and we used the monster word. She wasn't very happy with the M word, but point being is when the government tells you they don't exist, and then you're face to face with one, obviously your whole world turns upside down. The door you just opened is, I'm going to ask you this. That's one race you just described, the winged 7, 8 feet tall beings that have human-looking faces, very aggressive. Of course, many people know of the Greys. Mothman could either have been one of the ones that you're referring to, right, or maybe a whole separate race. How many races do you know of, whether they be extraterrestrial, from other dimensions, from other galaxies to our own solar system? Just give me a ballpark number that you know of.
Well, let me precede that by saying the universe is a vast playground that is maintained by a collaboration of highly spiritualized beings. Such beings rarely, if ever, manifest onto the playground that they oversee. The universe is but one of many endless physical and non-physical universes in existence. The universes in general are in the category of perpetuity, never beginning or ending, and are infinite. Universes are and exist inside of endless dimensions. Dimensions are infinite, never-ending, perpetual, and relatively bizarre. There is so much out there that it's almost impossible. It's impossible to say how many weird-type monsters, if you want to call them. There are trillions upon trillions upon trillions. There's plenty of bad guys, but there's also plenty of good guys. So to give you a number, it would be impossible, because, first of all, you'd have to understand how big the universe is. It's infinite, and to understand how big infinite is very, very difficult.
Multiverse would be a better word for it, correct?
What's that?
Multiverse instead of universe, right?
Yeah. Regardless of what most people think or believe, life is abundant all over the universe, in the endless billions of galaxies and the star systems inside the galaxies. Humans, for the most part, remain unaware of galactic marvels and the prevalent travel by industrious higher beings residing in a thriving and vibrant universe.
Now, again, based on all the knowledge you have from speaking to people that were in the know, from the books you've read, from just everything in your life, I know I asked you this to ask a ballpark figure, but from the beings that you know of, aside from the Greys, aside from the human-looking ETs, and the one that you just described, the 7-8 foot tall winged beings, can you just describe a few other beings that you know of that have visited us?
There's the ones that look just like us, except they have vertical pupils. And I have a few friends that have seen those and interacted with them. One is Bob Exler, who used to be heavy into all this research. I did a lot of research with Bob, and we came upon a bunch of interesting things. And he told me about an incident he had in a bar in Houston, which was predicated by him walking into E&G headquarters somewhere on the East Coast, it may have been Washington, D.C., and asked to see inside Area 51. The rest of the story is so bizarre, I don't have really the time to go into it, but he was showing all kinds of weird stuff. Yes, I believe it was true, and there was a lot of interesting things that he saw. There are all kinds of beings. Some, I asked Lou Baldwin, who knows a lot about this, I said, well, how about the alien in the movie Alien? He said, are there any things as bad as that? And he said, oh, much, much worse. I said, much, much worse? How worse could it be? And he said, well, they have ways of eating you and digesting you, which takes a long time. And he said, I won't go through the process because it's very, very scary. But these beings are much, much worse than the ones that were in the movie Alien.
For all the listeners out there, Bob Exler was a very public figure in ufology in the 90s. He was on pretty much every major television show. One of the big cases he dealt with was The Guardian, where somebody sent footage with it was a videotape with a thumbprint labeled Guardian, and what it basically showed was two different crafts landing in Canada. And that was also witnessed by a woman who essentially lived right near that area. Now, I'm going to go back to your roots. You were contracted to be a CIA pilot. Do you think, obviously we mentioned, and you brought it up, that the phones were tapped from Lazar, you, Mr. Huff. Now, do you think you've already been on the radar from the moment you signed the deal to start flying for the agency?
No, from the moment I was born, because my father was deep into this. There are records that Jeremy, I think, has seen. In 1952, my father's company, Lear Incorporated, was the head contractor for making anti-gravity vehicles. And I believe that that would have been in 1952. I believe something happened, and I believe it was the incident in Bogota where he gave an interview to some press saying that he believed that UFOs were real. They got him kicked out of, I don't think he was in MJ-12, but he was really at the top. And he was friends with Dr. The doctor in Albuquerque. Jeremy, what was his name?
The Dr. Benowitz.
No. The
no,
doctor
it wasn't Benowitz.
Pardon?
It wasn't Dr. Benowitz? Who are you talking about?
No. This is a doctor who was a surgeon at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and in 1947, after the
Vannevar Bush, maybe?
What?
Vannevar Bush?
No, I'll think of it in just a second. Anyway, this doctor was on the board of Lear Incorporated, and my dad was on the board of his company, and he definitely he was asked by the Air Force to go back to Albuquerque, where he was from, and start up the hospital. And this would be where they would do all the research on the aliens. He was the doctor that did all the research on the astronauts, starting with the Mercury astronauts. And there was all a big group of, for instance, in my home, which was in Santa Monica, 222 14th Street, guests were always there, and many of them were members of MJ-12 that I didn't know anything about that time. And most people know that when Moore came out with those papers on MJ-12, I knew how. My question was, is it true? Did they exist? Did MJ-12 exist? And the only way to find out was to go to General Jimmy Doolittle, who was still alive but retired and living in Carmel, California. And I know that my mom was very close to him. They lived down in 3rd Street in Santa Monica, and I know that they were always guests at our house. And his wife, Jo, passed away years before he did, before the general did. And I got my mom, this would have been in 1984 or 85, I believe, when the MJ papers first came out. And I said, Mom, I really need to know something. I said, I need to know if MJ-12 is real. And the only person that I know who's in MJ-12, or at least associated very close with it, is Jimmy Doolittle. Would you mind asking him if it's real? And it took me 6 months to get her talked into it, and finally one day, and this would have been in 1955 somewhere, she called him. She told me later that she said, and she called him often, so it wasn't like she called him out of the blue, and said, Jimmy, John's getting involved in something, and I don't know whether it's the right thing or not, but I would like to know if MJ-12 is real. And he said, yes, Moya, it was, but I can't tell you anything about it. And so that, for me, was the starting of everything, and the validation of what Moore had come up with. Whether or not the papers were real, I believe they're real, but a lot of people have said they weren't, and we're talking about the Eisenhower briefing. But I believe they were real, and that phone call from my mom to Jimmy Doolittle was the start of everything. And I have a picture on my frame on my den wall, which Jeremy has seen, and it's from Jimmy Doolittle, and it was written to me after I had an airplane crash in 1961 in Geneva, Switzerland, and I had been flying aerobatics in a Bucher Youngman, and I really got into a bad accident, and Jimmy Doolittle, who's a close friend of our family, wrote me, and he said, there's everybody goes through these accidents, but he said what it's important is to profit by these accidents and make sure that you have learned something. And I have that framed on my den wall with a picture of him taking off on the aircraft carrier to bomb Japan.
You mentioned the documents, and the irony is these are the Eisenhower briefing documents written by President Truman as he was leaving office and coming to Eisenhower. Ironically, Stanton Friedman, who says he doesn't believe Bob Lazar's story, validated the MJ-12 existence by finding in the National Archives a memo, I think it was either to or from Nathan Twining, and it referenced MJ-12. So to me, just like to you, and just like Mr. Corbell, if I'm not mistaken, and Mr. Webb, Johnny Webb, that these MJ-12 documents were real. And not only were they sent to Moore, they happened to coincide when the final member of the list on the MJ-12 died. Within weeks of his death, of that last person, that's when these were arrived in a film to Mr. Moore's home. Now, I'm going to come back to the ET issue, and I want to dive into some other conspiracies. First, let's back up a second and go with what you did with the CIA. You're a talented pilot. You hold every license issued by the FAA, and I remember even last time we spoke off air, I brought up the fact that I'm a skydiver, and I asked you if you have a rigger's license, and you do, which just proved to me that you literally have everything, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you held or hold 17 records, speed records or flying records. Am I mistaken?
It was 19 world speed records, and those records were set in 1966 in a Learjet Model 24 around the world, and they were point-to-point speed records. I don't think any of them stand anymore because, there's so many Learjets that go faster and had more fuel. But yes, at that time, I held those.
And that's what made you an asset, of course, being an excellent pilot and having all these licenses. But the fact that you had all those speed records is clearly an asset to the agency. Now let's go talk a little bit about what you did for the agency. I remember the story. We're gonna have to get the background of it, but you were transporting something, if I'm not mistaken, it was arms from one country to another. On one side of the plane, you had one tail number, but on the other side you had another tail number. That way they wouldn't catch on. Can you give us the background of that story and what exactly it was you were doing for the agency?
Yeah, I got a call to meet somebody in Frankfurt, Germany, and went to Frankfurt, checked into the hotel, and got a call to that in the morning to go down to Lufthansa, and there would be a prepaid ticket to Budapest, and to get on that airplane, and I would be met in Budapest by somebody, and he said, this is for flying a 707 from Europe, from Budapest down to Africa. And I said, okay. So got on the airplane and from Vegas somehow worked my way to Frankfurt, checked into the hotel. That evening, it was kind of funny because there was a movie theater right across in the terminal, Frankfurt terminal, and I went in. It was the latest James Bond movie, and so I'm sitting there, and I saw a row of people sitting in front of me, and I thought they were talking English, and I kind of said, who is that? He said, they turned around and they said, well, John, you didn't think you were going to get on this thing without us, did you? And of course, it was all the friends that I'd worked previous with, and so I met them the next morning. We went over to Lufthansa, got on that airplane, went to Budapest. There was a couple American guys, obviously CIA, that walked us through the Budapest customs. Got in a cab, went to the Hilton Hotel, went up to our rooms, and later we got a call to go into this one room to meet, and there was 8 other people. There was 9 of us, and that was 3 crews for the 3 707s that were in this operation. And so this guy gives us a briefing. Well, he's gone now, so I can say his name, Hank Wharton. He gave us this briefing about not to exchange money on the black market and this and that and so on. And I kept a copy of the briefing I have in my scrapbook here. And he said, okay, now we're going to go have dinner. And when we walked outside of the Hilton Hotel, we walked over to the Chain Bridge. And the Chain Bridge is this famous bridge in Budapest that is always in the postcards that you see. And we walked to the very middle of it. And that's when he said, okay, he said, where we're going to is from Budapest to Somalia. And we'll be making one stop in Jeddah for fuel. And he said, if anybody asks you, you're just carrying farm equipment to Africa. And he said, giving the briefing on this Chain Bridge because nobody could record it where we were. So the next morning, I was the first airplane in the group, and it happened that the fog level was 00, and we just went ahead anyway, took off, flew down to refueled at Jeddah, and then landed at in Mogadishu. This was in 1977, and the pretext of all of this was the fact that Somalia was being attacked by an Ethiopian group, and the Somalians needed ammunition, which was East Bloc ammunition, and they didn't have any, so they went to the Americans, and the Americans thought, well, this would be a good deal because Somalia has always been controlled by East Bloc of Russia and that, and if they're going to kick the Russians out, we need to give them East Bloc ammunition, which we got out of Budapest or out of Hungary. So we were the ones that transported that down to Somalia, and that went on for a couple of months, and the problem was that everybody knew, or all the guys against us knew that what we were doing, and the people from Aden were flying MiGs and trying to intercept us. And at one point, they did force one of the airplanes down, but we had our airplanes painted identical to the Mogadishu Airlines and Somalia Airlines, and so I didn't get forced down, but some other guys did, and a lot of guys quit the program then because they didn't want a chance being forced into Aden. That was the Somalia deal. The other things I did was I flew in Laos for Continental Air Services, which was the same thing as Air America.
Was that for Richard Armitage?
Pardon?
Was that under Richard Armitage?
Richard Armitage certainly was involved in that, but Continental Air Services was owned by Bob Six, who owned Continental Airlines, and he got into the program because there was a former Air America pilot who went to him and said, you know, there's no reason why another firm can't get in and get some money, making all this money in Laos, transporting these supplies. And what it was arms and ammunition. Now, the drugs we did not transport, neither did Continental Air Service, nor did Air America. Now, if you read the book by Richard McCoy, he certainly lays out some evidence that Air America did. I never worked for Air America, so I don't know the facts. The bottom line
there was
on that.
flights from Laos to Little Rock. Can you confirm any of that?
On where? From where?
To Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah, that. Pardon? Say it again.
It's Little Rock, Arkansas. But yeah, I understood that there were shipments coming into that a small airfield there, and half was for Clinton and half was for Bush.
Yeah, absolutely. That was way after I was flying in Laos. All that came up from South America, and that was a large operation. The bottom line is, yes, it's my opinion that we do transport all the drugs, because who else would we want to make that kind of money? I mean, there was hundreds of millions of dollars in that. Same thing we went into Afghanistan. It was strictly for the drugs, and it was to get hold of Afghanistan into the Hindu Kush, where it's prime areas for growing and producing opium and the poppy. And so we've more or less taken over the Hindu Kush. If you talk to anybody that flies over there, like I have a friend who flies the B-1 bomber, and he said that the entire Hindu Kush is a no-fly area. On all their maps, it's a no-fly. You can't do any bombing over there. The reason is because those are all our farms where we grow the drugs. Now, the opium poppy. Now, in 2002, the National Geographic, or one of the operations, one of the magazines, gave out the information that the drug supply out of Afghanistan had amounted to 2% of the world's supply. That was in 2002. In 2007, it was 98% of the world's supply. Now, if you're producing 98% of the world's drugs, who do you think is getting that money? It certainly isn't the Taliban or anybody like that. It's a major government.
Army that have been out in, I'm just saying, John, we've got the British Army that have been out in a place called Helmand Province for the last sort of 8 years, and all they do when they come back is say they look after, poppies and drugs. That's what they do. They're security guards.
Absolutely.
You just confirmed exactly what the Navy SEAL told me from the 60s. And one more interesting fact, just like you said, that the Taliban almost eradicated opium production in Afghanistan, and the
correct.
staggering figure to skyrocket 96% more, from 2% to 98% in a period of 5 years, is just a phenomenal figure. So,
it certainly is. That's a lot of dope.
And that funds a lot of the black ops projects that we don't know of. And this is on top of the super high taxes that we pay as United States citizens to fund other black ops projects that are on the books. And obviously this drug money is funding the ones that are very off the books. I'm going to ask a question to both you, Mr. Lear, and Mr. Corbell, whichever wants to go first, by all means. Now, you just confirmed me 2 more conspiracies, and of course I already knew one of them, but you just confirmed it that much further. What other conspiracies that our government, our United States government, if not the world's government, have come together to perpetuate amongst all the citizens of the world, including, I know 9/11 is one that you've talked about, but speak of a few, both of you, Mr. Corbell and Mr. Lear.
I think there's a Wikipedia conspiracy against John Lear. I've yet to see a good Wikipedia entry from my friend John here. I'm going to let John take that. John is the godfather of conspiracy. I'm a simple documentarian. I'm just making a film on the man. So John's really your resource for all that.
Mr. Lear?
Yes, the under part of the United States is just immense with hidden areas of towns, freeways, all kinds of things, and that costs a lot of money. There's all kinds of stuff. I just talked to a friend a couple of days ago that worked down there and saw some of those places. He saw the place particularly in the Ozarks near Mountain View. And it's just unbelievable how much area under the United States is taken over by these vast cities. And what it's for, I don't know. I'd certainly like to know. The other stuff is the space stuff. Now, certainly we know about the thing in New York, what was it called?
9/11, you talking about?
9/11, yeah. 9/11, the buildings 1, 2, and 7 were knocked out by a space beam, and that space beam started to be put up in 1969, and there's now 24 satellites that are armed and used to wipe out various places on Earth, and that was used for the buildings 1, 2, and 7, and that's why there was so much buildings that were completely wiped out, but there was no anything left, no residue of concrete or steel. It was all just pieces of substance that was about 80 microns in diameter. That was all the dust that came down Manhattan.
They dustified them, basically, essentially just disintegrated the buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, all that operation is operated by rockets going out of seem to be losing my memory here. What's that island down in
Cuba?
South Atlantic?
South Atlantic, Cuba, the Bahamas.
No, South Pacific.
Guam?
Diego Garcia?
Oh, yes. Is that what you're referring to?
Say again?
Diego Garcia?
No, on the other side of the world. I don't know why this stuff escapes me. I'm losing my mind.
Guam, maybe?
No, it's the southwest of Guam, and it's the area that has huge launch facilities. That has the Reagan launch facility that's used, and there's 3 or 4 rockets that go up every day. And now our attention is drawn towards giving
Is it the French where the European Space Agency take off?
Yeah, we're giving a lot of the information to the Russians.
KGB?
The Russians are transporting a lot of our personnel up into space.
ISS, the International Space Station. Yes, and that's pretty sad that our government no longer uses any public shuttle or any of rocket of that kind to bring astronauts into space publicly. But we are all aware of the military having a space program. Recently, I saw, and this is strange, rather than reading an article on the internet on one of the disclosure websites, I actually saw this on the CBS World News, and it was just out of the blue. I was just happened to be watching. I don't watch it very often, and they were showing, it seemed like it was being recorded in night vision. Of course, this was a public camera, government camera, and it showed this craft landing, and the news was that this was a space drone, a military space drone that had been in the space for over 2 years, and that blew me away. And that goes back to the citizen hearing when I believe it was Kevin Randall speaking about the space program, and Senator Gravel interrupts and says, yes, it exists. What do you know of the space program? Were they sending military astronauts with civilian astronauts, or were they just always doing it on their own? And one more thing layer to add on to that. We've been using the internal combustion engine, which is such old technology. We know they have to have reverse engineered several of these artifacts and disks and other vehicles that have crashed or have been shot down here on Earth. Aren't they using something better to get to these other planets, and including the moon, which is a satellite to us, but essentially is a planet, another world?
Yeah, we use all that technology, or at least some of it. And I'm trying to think of the name of the island that's southwest of Guam.
Marshall Islands?
Marshall Islands. What's the name of the facility there?
I don't know the name of the facility, but I'm glad you mentioned the Marshall Islands, because one thing I found it odd is to be consistent with us, even though they are several hundred of miles, if not 1,000 miles away from us. They have the same time zone as California and Nevada, Pacific time zone. And the reason I heard is so when we launch missiles, they can be on the same page time-wise. So you go,
I think it was.
Yeah, you go east or west of the Marshall Islands, and you're in different time zones, yet there you are in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. I just thought that was very bizarre, but nonetheless, I'm glad you brought that up. Also, 9/11, two things I want to throw in. On 9/10, as you know, Donald Rumsfeld was doing an interview, and he basically said that the Pentagon cannot account for, I believe it was $2.3 trillion or somewhere in the range between $2 and $3 trillion. And then, of course, on 9/11, the place that housed the documents, I think it was Building 7, is disintegrated. And one other thing, this bothers me dearly. When that happened, when the days after 9/11, the hours right after the towers were supposedly hit, or as we know, disintegrated, they were basically giving news live, and then whatever was bad for them to blow their conspiracy, blow their cover, they would never show again. So for instance, when Building 7 went down, you see the smoke going one way, but the smoke of the from what was smoldering was going with the wind, right? The other thing was the owner of Building 7, using demolition terms, says we had to pull it, meaning that they had to demolish it because of the damage. Now, here's what I don't get. Demolitions take so much time to plan. You have to not only get the demolitions there, the experts, and you have to place them in the proper positions and all these stuff. But according to him, he's telling the world basically, well, yes, America was attacked by terrorists, and while we're dealing with attacks, while these buildings are collapsing, while we're trying to rescue people and ground all airplanes, we were
running an exercise that morning with all of the, forces in place. We had the FBI down there. We had FEMA down there 2 days before it all happened, mind. So they certainly knew what was going on. We had a case on the Atlantic at the same time. There was an exercise, American exercise, on the Atlantic coast going on with planes crashing into buildings. Exactly the same time.
That was a cover for...
it's the same cover, John Lear, that they did in London for 7/7. They had an exercise that morning. It was my job. I was up all night, he says, Mr. Powers. And we had bombs going off at exactly the same stations and public transport. I mean, it's ludicrous to think that we're that gullible that we believe that these exercises... It's like lightning strikes twice. I've heard it, 3 times. But this is ridiculous. People have to wake up.
So I don't know much about these things, but what I do know is that John, being a decorated pilot, not only flying for the CIA but having so many decades flying for commercial airlines, has a lot of knowledge and understanding. Additionally, because of his family business being Lear Incorporated, I would love to hear from you, John. Kind of why you've taken the opinion that you have. Why is it that what we know about that happened on 9/11? Why, as a pilot, do you have problems with it? And why did you write that affidavit as a pilot? Can you give us a perspective on that situation as a pilot?
Well, I am a pilot who is retired, and so they can't take action. They already got me fired from American Transair, and that was because I was talking about UFOs. I happened to mention to the passengers leaving Las Vegas as we flew to the east of Groom Lake. I said that's where the government produces the they inspect and try to go back and they do the research on the UFOs, and so that was the grounds for getting me fired.
It's sad because you go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh yeah, right. So I mean, but what is it specifically as a pilot? Because everybody talks in generalities about this type of thing, and I'm not an expert in this theory. But as a pilot, what is it that you find so unconvincing about the events on that day of 9/11?
Unconvincing on 9/11. Oh. Well, they said that it was done by planes, and that's, of course, ridiculous. Anybody that flies a plane knows that you couldn't hit a building within 10 feet of the exact center of where they want to hit at 560 miles an hour. Of course, the airplane cannot go that fast. It's just absolutely impossible. But for a pilot to allegedly, who has no time in climb in a 767 or what was it, 777, and fly those routes and try to hit the building is just absolutely impossible. It cannot happen. And so it's just absolutely impossible. There have been so many pilots that have tried to maneuver like that in simulators since then, and have actually proven to anybody that wants to watch it's impossible to do. They allow anybody to fly their simulators and say, look, here you are, 31,000 feet, 90 miles north of Las Vegas, or 90 miles north of New York. Go ahead and find New York and try and hit the buildings. Well, first of all, here's an Arab hijacker. How's he going to find New York? It's not that you can see 90 miles, because you can. And so even if you could get there, how are you going to time the design from 30,000 feet to 800 feet where they supposedly hit? How are they going to time that? And then how are they going to line up to descend the last 8,000 feet and 15 miles? It's just impossible. It cannot be done. And of course, there's even today, and it's been 11 or 12 years, we always hear that the pieces and parts have been found. I heard the other day, they found a piece of landing gear. Well, what that was a come-along that somebody had found and dropped down the side of the building. It's just ridiculous for pilots are certificated and know this stuff, that somebody is still passing this information around that airplanes crashed into the buildings. It did not happen. It could not happen. Well, I don't know how much the governments of the world know, but there is a civilization on the moon. It's about 250 million people, and they're humans like us, but not from Earth. They're from someplace else. They're way ahead of us, both technologically and sociologically, and they have they're many hundreds and hundreds of years ahead of us, and so many scientists and different types of people have been taken by this civilization up to visit their planet, and they don't show it to everybody, and I don't think they make a plan of showing it to earthly governments. But they do show them around, show them all their farms and places that they trade with other planets in our solar system. Our solar system, NASA tells you there's 9 planets. There's actually 40 planets, and they are all have civilizations. Some of them are different, some of them are not. Many of them have alien civilizations. Some have human civilizations. But all of these planets have additional moons, and those moons are also have civilizations. Venus and Mars, we're told that Venus has a surface temperature of 800 degrees centigrade. That's not true. There's a normal breathing atmosphere and a normal temperature there. One of the things that this points out is the sun does not radiate heat. The fire that you're seeing is not a nuclear reaction. There is no nuclear reaction on the sun. What it radiates is a electromagnetic wave. This wave is not heat itself. What it does is it changes the atmosphere of a planet when it goes through the planet's own atmosphere. Like Earth, it changes this to a normal temperature of 72 degrees. Mars is the same, 72 degrees. Incidentally, Mars has a extensive population. That's where Bigfoot comes from. And he's very, very advanced. He just wears those costumes of the big hairy beast, but that's not what they really look like. Also, all the other planets, Venus, population, they look like us, but they're considerably more advanced. We have a lot of rockets going up to the space. Now, I don't know whether we're going to the moon or not. We certainly didn't go during the Apollo program. That was all faked by Stanley Kubrick. He's the one that faked the moon photos, moon astronauts for NASA, and then he hid out for the rest of his life. He never left his home because he was thought that he was going to be killed like everybody else in that moon fake program. We do have manned rockets going out of Kwajalein, which is the Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Center, and they launch just about every day there. And we're told that we have to go to Russia to get people into space. That's not true. Let's see. Come on with a conspiracy. Malaysia Flight 370. The press keeps still asking where it is. What they saw, MH17 crashing in Ukraine, was actually 370. It was kept in a Middle East country with all the dead passengers on board, and it was outfitted with a remote control so that the fighters flying next to it could guide its flight. And then on the day that MH17 was supposed to leave Amsterdam, they just flew this airplane up with a jet fighter on each side and guided it into the track that MH17 was following, or was supposed to follow. When it got to Ukraine, it turned left about 20 degrees and went in country until approximately over the Zionist-held portion of Ukraine, and then it shot it down. The fighters on the side each shot the engines and the airplane, and it crashed. And fortunately, there were pictures taken of the crashed aircraft. That the pictures of the tail and the stripe down the side and the different window configurations proved that it was MH370, which is a new 777, not the old type that was flown by MH17. And so the difference in paint jobs proved that the airplane that crashed in Ukraine was 370. You'll notice that none of the passengers have been identified because they can't identify them. They've had a couple of fake funerals where the paid actors, crisis actors, show up and sob for the press about their family members killed, but that was not true. At least they were not killed on MH17. All those on MH370 were killed. Now, the whole reason behind all of this 370 stuff is there was a very valuable electronic device work, and it was invented by, the patent was held by five entities, 4 Chinese men and one, the company held by the Carlyle Group. And the 4 Chinese that held the portion of that patent were on 370, and they had to get rid of them. The Carlyle Group had to get rid of them, so that's why 370 had to be diverted off course. I don't know whether it had the control of the captain or not, but they were held for many weeks, and the bodies were just left on board. I don't know whether they killed or they just died on board without food. But then they crashed in Ukraine, and all the bodies could not be identified. We talked about the moon. The universe is infinite, and wanted to say one of the really interesting things that I've come about is Perry Spalter, who was a mathematician, wrote a book called The Gravitational Force of the Sun in 1993, and she proves the gravitational force is independent of mass of the attracted body. There is no basis for Newton's assumption that gravitational force is due to and is proportional to the quantity or density of matter. In other words, the equation m1 times m2 over r squared does not equal the gravity of a planet. It's actually something else, and it has to do with Kepler's third law. So what that means is that every single figure that NASA ever gave us for any of the planets, including the atmosphere and the gravitational force, is all wrong. And because Einstein predicated his theories of relativity, both special and general, on Newton's universal law of gravitation, that makes everything that Einstein said wrong. So practically everything we know is wrong, and it was all proven by Perry Spalter. You might want to get the book. It's Gravitational Force of the Sun, and it's published by Orb Publishing in Granada Hills. I was going to talk about the Big Bang. There is no Big Bang. The universe is infinite. Of course, there is no God as such, but there are superior beings. The Navy has a transportation system that goes around the world, and it's called the tubes, and it's called riding the tubes when they go somewhere in it. The main base of the Navy transportation tube system is in Coronado, down by the submarine pens. That's where they board. They can get on these little little not cars, but little transportation systems, and go anywhere in the world in a matter of minutes. And that's been in use for 30 or 40 years. They also use them stateside, go anywhere in the United States. Another thing I wanted to talk about was when NASA murdered Gus Grissom in Apollo 1. They murdered him because he was so outspoken about Apollo 1 not being ready to go to the moon in '69. In '67, he said, this thing ain't going to go to the moon in 2 years. This thing ain't going to go to the moon in 10 years. So they had to get rid of him, and they rigged up the Apollo 1 to catch on fire. Joe Shea was the manager of Apollo, and he usually rode inside the Apollo 1 with the three astronauts to help them with some of the problems. But the day that it would caught fire, he was in New York, and there was another person, a fourth person, who was from the secret NASA space program, who was killed also. That's why in the very beginning, after the fire and it cooled down, that nobody was allowed up there except this secret group who went in to pull that fourth person out so that nobody would find out there was a fourth person on board the Apollo 1. And the reason they didn't want to the public to find out is they would want to know, number one, why it wasn't told, and number two, where this guy came from. And of course, that would expose the secret NASA astronauts.
Johnny, you had a question. Go ahead, Johnny.
Go ahead.
Concur with what you were saying about the Malaysian air flight, because there's photographs that have turned up at Ben Gurion Airport. The plane sitting there under the nose wheel. There's like obviously the fuselage part that opens up to let the wheel in and out. When it's open, it has two digits on it. In this case, they were called Romeo Delta RD, and on the Malaysian flight, it had the numbers Romeo Oscar. So very close in the same numbers. So that was to confirm that the plane was actually in fact sitting at Ben Gurion Airport.
Okay, Osama bin Laden was not killed in Pakistan, as the Navy said. That was all a scam. He died in the Kuwait hospital in 2001. I forget what the thing was. I think it was a liver problem. But that whole phony thing that Obama pulled off and said was SEAL Team 6 going in to kill him, that was somebody else, and they just killed that guy and said that he was Osama bin Laden. The Mars rover pictures that we're getting of Mars were taken in Death Valley. Most of them are in Death Valley. Mars is a very highly populated planet. It has people both living on the surface and underground, and there's very little possible way that that they could get pictures unless they landed in a place like the United States has Death Valley and a couple of places that do not have any particular life that we could see. But all you see about Mars is a scam. The real story is there's plenty of civilizations up there. Wanted to tell you about the Titanic. We were told that Ballard discovered it a few years ago. Actually, he had a deal with the Navy that they would let him use their ship if he would let them use it for 3 years before they told the public. So the Navy was on board and doing everything they had to do, whatever it was, for 3 years before the public ever saw it. And when Ballard came on and said, these are the first pictures taken of Titanic and la-di-da-da-la, and all that was baloney.
I saw a very interesting documentary that aired in Britain, in the UK in the 80s, and it basically said that what was on the dry dock as the Titanic actually ended up becoming the Olympic when it showed up in England. And that's why a lot of the high-end passengers got off, because apparently a year or two before, the Olympic collided with an Italian ship, and because the Olympic was so big, insurance didn't pay out on it. Did you ever hear anything along those lines?
Absolutely, I saw that, and I think it's true.
Yeah.
I definitely.
Also,
Go ahead,
just to put something towards that, was that on the back of the ship, of these two ships in Ireland, when they were built, they actually engraved the signature names of the ships. And what you saw was that when they set the ships out for release, they put plaques over these actual engraved areas and renamed them. And so when they went down to the Titanic and saw the back where the ship was, you can clearly see that some of the plaques that were put on there had fallen off, and the original engravings was behind, and it spelt out the words Olympia or Olympic, whatever the ship was called, rather than Titanic.
That's correct.
Back to some of the things that you said. You said a lot of several very important things. The equations that were wrong in our universe. This correlates to what Ben Rich said to the UCLA Department of Engineering in the 90s, where he basically said that our equations were wrong, but we fixed them. And therefore, that correlates to what that book that you were speaking about that was published in 1993, The Gravitational Force of the Sun. Are you correlating the two together?
No, Ben Rich, I think, was, first of all, Ben Rich was, I think, in my personal opinion, the highest-ranking Mossad agent west of the Mississippi in the United States. He was born into a very wealthy Jewish family in the Philippines and sent to work for Lockheed in 1953, and he slowly climbed up the ladder until he took over the Skunk Works for Kelly Johnson. And one of the things he did is he was the one that was behind the F-19. The F-117A was a cover for the F-19, most of which airplanes went to Israel. There were 64 of them built, and they were built on the other side of an iron curtain between the F-117A production line and the F-19. And the people that worked on the F-19 were not allowed to go through the curtain to the F-117A, and the F-117A persons were not allowed to go over to the F-19 as if they could keep a secret, but all the people that worked on these airplanes knew what was going on. That airplane was built without any funds being found out. All the funds that went to the F-117A, half of them were transferred to the F-19. General Bobby Bonds found this out in, I think, 1978 or 1979, and Ben Rich talks about it in his book, and he says that Bonds, who was head of the Air Force 117A program, walked into the Skunk Works and saw a office that had a lock that was strictly only a high-security Navy lock, and he wanted to know what it was doing there. And Ben Rich said, "I can't tell you." And he said, "Well, you better tell me, or I'm going to take that crash axe and knock the door down." So Ben Rich had him sign a lot of the non-disclosure type of releases and let him in, and that's when Bobby Bonds found out the existence of the F-19. In order to keep his mouth shut, what they did is in 1984, they let him fly the F-19 and disable the electronics, the electronic controls of the airplane, and it crashed right over Little Skull Mountain, just at the very tip of the south end of the Nevada test site. And they said it was an accident, and they never did find out exactly what happened. They said the airplane was a MiG-23, but there was no way that General Bobby Bonds would be flying the MiG-23 because it had been up there for years, and he had nothing to do with that program. He was strictly with the F-117A program. What they were using all the MiGs for when they started arriving up in Groom Lake in 1968 was they were measuring their electronic output so that they could put that electronic output in the radar of U.S. ships so that when they were flying around and the U.S. radars picked up those blips, they could identify them very quickly as to what it would be, whether it was a MiG-29, MiG-23, MiG-21, and what kind of armament it was carrying. And all these airplanes were flowing out of the Tonopah Test Range, which was allegedly called Area 52, but I never heard that myself. I've just seen that in recent programs, and I never heard that when it was going on. But it was the Tonopah Test Range that they were flying out of. And,
looking online and looking at the F-19 on Google, it's remarkable how much it looks like the craft that was recovered from Roswell. When you see like photographs and sketches of the Roswell craft, it looks very similar.
Well, the Roswell would be 1947, and if somebody made that, then it could possibly do that, but there was no way the F-19 had anything to do with the Roswell crash. The Roswell crash was an ET crash that was allowed to crash so that the U.S. could get a hands up on some of the technology within the craft. The book that Lou Baldwin puts out, I think it's called, I'll get the name in a couple seconds here, but he tells exactly what happened at Los Alamos and what they found out from this craft. And it's a very interesting book, and it's written as fiction, but it is actually nonfiction. And the name of the book is, Lou Baldwin wrote UFOs in the Year of the Dragon. That's one of the recent ones. That's excellent. The other one is A Day with E.T., In League with a UFO. That's the name of the book that has the Los Alamos information of Roswell, In League with the UFO, and tells what we found in it, and extremely interesting. And the last book that Lou Baldwin wrote was, I'll give you the name in a second here, as soon as it's lying right here, but if you're brave enough to read it, that tells you the exact truth of the origination of man and what's going on in the universe, the whole thing. And when I say brave enough, you've got to be ready to dump your concepts of God and the Big Bang and the Darwin theory and all the rest of the stuff. Moses, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, all that stuff are just fictional stories. And if you're not ready to discard those, then don't read the book. But the name of the book is Mars and the Lost Planet Man. The Planet Man.
I'm glad.
Pardon?
Go ahead. Mars and the Lost Planet Man, you said?
And the Lost Planet Man. Now, the planet Man was the planet that was between Mars and Jupiter that was destroyed by E.T. because something was going on that planet that they didn't want to go on. And it was too big to handle it any other way than just destroying the planet. And it was done millions of years ago. And all those pieces of that planet have been dropping for millions of years on Mars, Earth, Venus.
Is that the planet that was called Tiamat? Tiamat. Yeah, it's like Nibiru, Tiamat. It was like supposedly a planet that got hit, and obviously it was a water-based planet. They reckon that this planet, when it got hit, the water came down to Earth. But the story is, I found out that this is interesting because I watched a documentary the other day, and it was funny because it was the same people that made the documentary on nanothermite, where you see it go through the head of the car engine. Well, this same company, they made a documentary on water, and what it was, they showed you this like bulldozer with a big pile of water in its front, and it lifted up to about 30-40 foot, and then it just dropped it on this car, and it just crushed this car. And then they said, if you take this water, the same amount, and you take it to like 1,000 feet, but we don't have 1,000 feet. What we do have is 400 feet. We have a big a big tower in England on a church steeple. So they got up there and they got a big bucket of water, and they poured it out over a sand castle that they'd made on the floor. And when it poured, you would expect it to do the same to the car, crush it. Well, what happened was, as it started to fall, the higher it was, as it fell, it dispersed. The air got into it and bubbled it up and just dispersed all this amount. And it never really touched the sandcastle. So going back to the Tiamat planet theory, that this water came off this planet when it crashed and landed on Earth, we had, 40 days of rain. 40 days and 40 nights is the story. And that's not just in the Bible. That goes back to the Anunnaki. It's in their stories. But something definitely happened. So, just to put, information to what you're talking about, that's the story that I understand, and that planet was called Tiamat.
Do you know anything about that, Mr. Lear?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you opened up the door to Roswell, because that was two things that I had to ask you specifically related. One is crash and retrievals, which obviously Roswell was, and I'm glad you mentioned that the United States government wanted it to crash because following Roswell, there was a standing order to shoot them down. We wanted their technology. And then the second thing related to Roswell being in New Mexico was Dulce. So I'm wondering if we could address both those issues, other crash and retrievals, and then, of course, the underground facility at Dulce, New Mexico.
Yeah, we have many recoveries, crash recoveries. Most of them, I think all of them were performed by the ETs themselves to give us some heads up on the technology. We didn't shoot any down, so I don't know how they got down. The only reason that came out is the government wanted people to believe that we had a heads up deal on the weapons that we had, and they could shoot the flying saucers down, but that was total baloney. So as far as Dulce, yes, Dulce's been there for many years. They continually add pieces and parts to it. I have a friend that's worked in there for many years, and he's told me all the stories about what goes on there, and it's true. Now, I went there in 1987, and I drove into Dulce, and I called the head of the highway patrol there. I forget what his name is. He died a couple of years ago. But I said, my name is John Lear, and I'm here in town to... I said, you don't know me, but he says, yes, I know you, John. He said, I was here when you flew in 20 years ago with stakes for Dean Martin, and you also flew in his girlfriend because he was filming a movie here. And so we had the connection 20 years prior, and he invited me out on a run that particular night, and I rode with him in his vehicle from 10 to 6 in the morning and listened to all his UFO stories, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, John, that was Gabe Valdez. I interviewed him before. Yeah, so tell us that story a little bit. That was pretty amazing. You rode with him.
Did what?
The details, the story.
Tell us the details. You rode with him, right?
Yeah. And so since then, I found out that the vents that people are looking for cannot be seen in the daytime. They can only be seen at night with these heat sensing units, because in the daytime, of course, the vents would be the same temperature. They wouldn't be that much hotter. But at night, they would be much hotter and be able to see them. So one of the TV programs that went in there couldn't find the vents, and that's why.
About 20-some years ago, could have been closer to 24, 25, I saw a very interesting documentary with you in it, and you were talking about the firefight in Dulce, New Mexico. Can you go into detail on what happened there, where several United States soldiers were killed, if not private military contractors, mercenaries?
Okay, what happened, and everybody claims it, or most people claim it was a war. It was not a war. It was an accident, and what happened was there was a Gray teaching 40 U.S. scientists, top U.S. scientists, giving a lecture and information on high technology. And in this classroom, accidentally, one of the Delta Force went in, and he had a regular sidearm on his belt. And they were all told many, many times and had to sign clearances that said that they were advised they would never approach or go anywhere that a Gray was with a loaded firearm, because they would be killed instantly. So anyway, this guard walked in accidentally into this classroom, and he was immediately killed by the Gray. And apparently it was some kind of weapon that he held in his hand. Back in their particular headquarters of the Dulce part, his comrades saw this killing, and they all went down to, there was, 22 of them, I think, and they all went down to retaliate against the killing of this one guard, and the alien killed them all, including all the scientists, and that's where the number 66 comes from. And they were all killed on that one day, and it was only because of that one soldier that went in, one of the Delta Force that went in wearing a sidearm. Now, Bob Lazar read this account when he was allowed to read all these briefings on different things that the U.S. had done, and this particular incident was written down exactly as I've told you, except it wasn't said that it happened at Dulce. It said it was happened at Area 51. And the reason I think it said that is because Bob's clearance at that point, when he was reading the documents, had not risen to the level of knowing about Dulce. And as Bob had told us, he was those folders that he was reading had staples in them up to the part where his clearance was advanced, and every week that he went there, the staples the staple point where he had read had been put in a little more back, allowing him to read a few more pages. And so I think that the reason it said it happened at Area 51 is because his clearance had not reached the level to know about Dulce. But Dulce is real. It's there. It's manned all day long, 365 days a year. It's a very interesting place.
Was Dulce created by our United States government, or was it an extraterrestrial base that later the United States government came to and worked jointly?
I don't know. It's possible that that was created, the original hull was created in the nuclear program that we had, where we were taking and exploding atomic bombs underground all over the United States, and Dulce happened to be one of those places. It does seem that it's possible that happened, but there's so much there that it's probable that the ETs created it themselves, because the hallway of hell, or whatever they call it, is on the 7th level, and that's way down there. So I don't think any U.S. personnel are allowed in there.
I know Phil Schneider, he worked at Dulce, and he gave his story before he died, so he can certainly confirm what you're saying. And
yeah, I don't believe anything Phil Schneider said. He did work on some underground things that the U.S. had, but not Dulce. If he worked at Dulce, it was not when that fight occurred, and he said that he had been injured in that fight, and that's not true. What he did, he did have some information about Dulce, and he took advantage of that to give some lectures, make some money at lectures. Now, when he was killed, it certainly looked like a murder, but I don't know what any of that was about. I just know that his Dulce story was not true.
Going back, sorry, John, just before you were talking about Bob Lazar reading manuscripts and bits while he was working in Area 51. I remember on the Bob Lazar's webpage back in 1992, this is, he described, in intricate detail what he did, how he used to go down this particular coloured line, and he was not allowed to deter off of the line. But he talked about receiving a book that was like a holographic book. I suppose today it would be called a tablet. But in them days, it was holographic. And he said, I moved it, different pages would turn. And I wondered, did he ever discuss that with you at all?
Yeah. And what he did was he could tip the picture, the book, and he could tip it forward and back, and the picture would go, say, if it was taken at the front of a building, as he tipped it one way, it would show you further in, and tipped all the way back, it would show you all the way to the other end of the building. If he tipped it to the right, you could see what was down the hallway to the right, or if he tipped it to the left. It was very interesting, and he didn't know how it was printed.
Lazar working on this craft at S4. Two things I want to say. First, I wonder if you can go into detail of why he was denied access to the top of the craft or what was in it. And secondly, I would like to think that through this technological explosion that we've had over the last 50 years, we've actually done a lot of reverse engineering, and it's gone down through the black ops to the higher end of the military, down to the military, and finally into the white market, the civilian market. Do you think that we're actually making progress using alien technology, or is it still all bundled up in private corporations, private military contractors, and, of course, the United States military bases?
Yeah, it's all bundled up, and it will be bundled up forever. There's no possible way that it will ever be released by our military or whoever has control of it. They're just bound and determined not to advance, but giving us electricity at a reasonable price and gas at a reasonable price or propulsion at a reasonable price. It's just not going to happen.
And yet they could.
Oh, yeah, sure. They have the technology themselves. They have it up at Groom Lake. But as I said, Groom Lake is the United States of Area 51, and it has its own little country there, and they have their own rules and regulations. And if you're going to work there, you have to sign your total rights away. You don't have any rights under United States law. And when you go to work there, if they don't like what you're doing, they either kill you or they can put you in prison. They used to put them in prison up in that federal prison that's northeast of Reno. I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, the problem was that some of the guys that were in there were telling the other inmates about the physical dimensions and workings of Groom Lake, and those guys were passing it along to other people. And so they had to make a prison, and it's a gigantic prison, and it's in the very center of the Nevada test site, and that's where the people go that violate the discretion of, when you get off the plane, there's a blue, yellow, or a red line or a different color line that you're supposed to follow, and if you get more than 1 foot from that line, you're taken out and put in that prison, and you never get out.
In that sovereign nation, and that correlates exactly to what you said about Lazar speaking about, and of course not using United States military, using private military contractors such as Wackenhut.
Janet Air, sorry, John, Janet Airlines, the people that pick them up from McLaren Air Force Base or airport and then take them out to the Air Force Base. Who is it that runs Janet Air? Is it a private corporation, a contractor? Why isn't, if we say, look, we can't get into Area 51, the president doesn't have permission to go to Area 51, then let's blockade their planes and their buses. And so, who runs these corporations? Who are they? This is what I don't understand. The questions that's very simple should be asked. Who runs Janet Air, and how is Janet Air allowed to feed people in and out without the government's permission?
Well,
it's a fair question.
That's the big question, and nobody knows the answer. Nobody can get the answer because there's nobody brave enough or has enough power to answer that question. And if anybody tried to force the issue, they'd just be eliminated.
Or sent to that prison where essentially you'll never be heard from again. You just disappear, essentially. Now, going back to what you were talking about earlier, I'm going to go back to the moon and the human-looking extraterrestrials that you talked about there. I heard another interesting theory, and I'm hoping you could shed some light on this, that human-looking, that are humanoids, were seeded across all around the galaxy and other galaxies, and that's why some evolved a little bit differently, but that's why there's several that has similar atmospheres to Earth, evolved in essentially the same way and look just like us. Do you believe that's a plausible theory, or do you think that each one essentially was created by another extraterrestrial race?
No, the one main people that extraterrestrials that made humanoids put them all around the different galaxies in the universe. And of course, the universe is infinite, so to say they put them in all of them is not really true. They could be in some of them, but certainly not all of them. And they're not made individually.
Okay, about 20-some years ago, maybe I could be wrong, maybe about 15 years ago, you did this remarkable interview with Art Bell, and you basically gave what you would do if you were tasked with being the one person to disclose to the world.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about that, because I thought that was a brilliant way to tell the people. What would you do now? Would you change the way you said it, or would you do exactly what you knew then?
I'd have to look over it. There were a few changes I'd make. I can't remember what they were, but if we do a program again, what I'll do is I'll go back and we'll go through. I think they call it the John Lear test or something like that. But everybody was taking the John Lear test, and it was a big deal there for a couple of years.
In that interview, there was a remarkable story that you gave where essentially these two military personnel were walking down a hall and they did not know, or they were guards at a doorway, and these two extraterrestrials were walking by, and these military personnel didn't know about them, and they literally were scared so bad they dropped dead of heart attacks. And so they began to acclimate United States military personnel that were going to work in such bases by showing them different phases of ETs, but not quite the actual ones. Do you know if that program is still in place to acclimate people that are going to go into such service?
I don't know. I haven't had any real good sources from Area 51 for a long time. They really increased their security, and for many years there, the first question, and everybody got a lie detector test every 90 days, the first question is, do you know John Lear, and what is your relationship with him? Because they knew I was getting information out of there, but they didn't know who it was. Yes, that story was true. I don't know whether it's still in effect. It must be, because what that was just a regular whack-and-hood guard, and he was guarding a corridor. And in those days, they were not briefed who might be walking down the corridor. And in that case, one of these probably one of the praying mantises came strolling down the hallway, and the guy just dropped dead of a heart attack. And so after that, what they did is they took these people, and for 3 or 4 weeks, they took them into this room and would flash pictures, not complete pictures, but some grayed out, 20%, 40%, 60%, 90%, gradually, so that they could get used to seeing this thing. And so then they had to go through that program before they were put on any guard duty, where they might see one of these things strolling down the carpet.
That would make perfect sense, because what better way to get someone used to something that supposedly and officially doesn't exist? Now I'm going to go along the same lines of speaking of extraterrestrials and disclosure. I'm sure you recall President Medvedev gave an interview to a Russian state journalist on their television, and he thought the cameras were off and the microphone was off, and the journalist went on to ask him, is the president or the prime minister Putin briefed daily about extraterrestrials? And Medvedev goes on to say that yes, along with his nuclear codes that he's given every day, he's giving a daily briefing on extraterrestrials here on Earth. And then he goes on to further to say that there's an organization of military, a secret military organization that keeps track of these extraterrestrials living on Earth. And he says it's similar to the American movie Men in Black. And he says, I'm not going to say anything further because it's too scary to tell you how many people are on Earth, essentially is what he said. A lot of people spun this around and said, oh, he was joking. But if you actually see the video, this man is not joking. There is no texture of any joking in his face, in his smile. He is very serious when he said it, and he clearly thought the microphone was off. So my question to you is the Men in Black that he was referring to, do you know anything about them? And do you also consider what Medvedev said as essentially disclosure?
Yes, that was probably accidental disclosure. It was true. I don't have any direct source to that, but indirectly, yes, that group does exist.
Now, Snowden. Obviously, he made some serious waves earlier this year. I was hoping that he'd be sitting on some UFO information, but obviously we don't know. What do you know about Snowden that's not out in the public? And if whatever you do know that's already in the public, why do you think the NSA still is letting him be alive? Because obviously we have assets in Moscow and other parts of the world that can silence him easily, right?
Yeah, but they're gradually trying to let this stuff out. And allegedly, the head of MJ-12 was a guy named Admiral Cunningham. During the time that Bob Lazar and I were, Bob Lazar was working at S4, and I heard, and it's on the internet somewhere, that Cunningham ordered them to hire Bob Lazar because they would they knew that he would give the information to me and that I would give it to the public, and that way they could get the information out without there being a credible, provable source. In other words, they made Bob Lazar's education disappear. He did have a master's at MIT and one at Caltech. And they made that disappear. So what they were trying to do was get the information gradually out to see what the public's reaction would be.
And that goes exactly what we were talking about the last hour, where I was basically saying that Stanton Friedman's argument that he was a C- student, therefore he couldn't have made it to that level of degree, is kind of BS in the sense that I was a C- student in high school and I went off to get a doctorate as well. So, and obviously it's very easy for the government to just make things disappear. So it's not surprising if he's not in the yearbook, just take away his diploma, pay off some of the professors, or maybe they're retired and no one can vouch that he was there. So I think that's a perfect way to discredit it, but yet very, very sad. Now, here's another major question.
Well, let me just say that Stan Friedman is an idiot.
Well, hopefully one day we can get you guys through, but that's all right. That's a whole separate topic. He doesn't want to talk about it. It could be beyond Roswell or Betty and Barney Hill. But are we an alien ant farm? Are we basically here for their amusement?
No, we're made as just one of their ongoing projects, and there's other projects too. And if you read these 3 or 4 Lou Baldwin books that came out that I read to you, and I'll read them again. Just read those 4, and you will know more than anybody else on Earth. And there's probably less than 1,000 of us. But Lou Baldwin's books were UFOs in the Year of the Dragon, A Day with an ET, In League with a UFO, and Mars and the Lost Planet Man. Those 4 books, and you will know everything.
2 more books that you suggested in the past, or I remember one of the names of the books, the author that I was fascinated with. One I got, Ringmakers of Saturn was the name of one book. The other was the author Howard Menger. You recommended those as reading for us essentially too, right?
Right. Yeah, Howard Menger died just 2 years ago, and he went to the moon in 1956. And he's the one that told us that they had to orbit the moon for a week to get them physiologically able to handle the atmosphere on the moon, which at the surface was equal to 18,000 feet on the Earth. And just as we have to go up slowly when we climb Everest, in other words, go up 5,000 feet and stay there a couple of weeks, then go up another 5,000 a week and stay there a couple of weeks, is to get your body accumulated to working with less oxygen. And that's what they were doing in 1956 with Menger. And then he said he got on the moon after a week, and he could breathe, with nothing, with not being in a house or anything, being in the open air. And he tells the story about going in a train all around the moon, this maglev train, and stopping in the middle of a desert somewhere, and they were allowed to get out, and to show them that yes, it was very, very hot, but it wasn't as hot as NASA says, and they could certainly breathe there without any problem.
China sending that rover or whatever you want to call it to the moon obviously was shocking because supposedly we were there, then we stopped going there, and as you mentioned earlier, there's civilizations there and we haven't been there. Do you think that was more propaganda of sending that rover, whatever we sent that they sent to?
It was propaganda. The Chinese were using old NASA pictures.
And of course, what the pictures that you see in Time magazine from '69 are very different than the pictures that they've been showing us for the last 40-some years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only 6 pictures of the moon that were taken where you could actually see very much. And I had the photos that I use taken from NASA book that was published pre-1970, which was when NASA used to start to airbrush all of their pictures. And also the one good picture I have of the moon was taken by a guy in England. I forget his name, but he took 192 separate photographs with his telescope and then put them all together. And that's where I got the famous picture of Aristarchus that has a picture of some kind of construction that's 23 miles in diameter. It looks obviously constructed to do something. Maybe it's a nuclear reactor, maybe it's a machine of some sort, I don't know, but it was obviously constructed for something.
Mr. Lear,
Go ahead, Johnny.
What's the best UFO you've actually seen, be it on YouTube or in real life or in pictures from friends and stuff? Can you tell us?
Yeah, I've never seen one up close except the one that Bob Lazar took me out to see. I saw that at a distance through a telescope. But all the ones that Billy Myers had were all true, and so many people are out there to discredit Myers. That's why I got kicked off of Above Top Secret. I had the highest rating there, and then I got into a slight argument with a guitar repairman out of New York. I forget what his name was, but he was absolutely, he said he could make one of those models of the Billy Myers saucers in an
Christmas
evening.
cake.
Then he came out with a ridiculous model that had, was just insane. And then they used a cover of a trash can and some other stuff.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. But the fact is, everything that Bill Myers saw and showed us and took pictures of is real. It is real. And I just talked to a friend from Ecuador who came to Las Vegas. He had been over in Switzerland, went to Billy Myers' house, didn't see Billy Meyer, but talked to the guy who represents Billy. When you go there, you don't get to see Billy, you get to see his rep. And he had all of his questions answered. He firmly is a believer now, like I am.
Well, there was a woman who worked for the United Nations, wasn't there? And she said that when he was in an ashram in India, a disc had appeared over this particular temple or Buddhist place they were visiting, and she was standing with Billy Meyer. And years later, she'd read books and then realized, wow, that was the guy that I was standing with in this ashram. And so she came on to a UFO network, it might have been MUFON, and put her story forward to confirm that she was with, Billy Meyer, and this man's not, a fake, he's real. And what he does and how he has this connection with these Palladians is very real.
Yeah.
Even Bob Lazar mentioned Billy Myers' craft and said that the craft he worked on at S4 was identical to Billy Myers. Right.
That's true. And when they came over, Gene Huff and Bob Lazar came into my house for the first time, and I had promised to give them all my UFO stuff in exchange for a house appraisal that Gene Huff did. Among that was 3 of the Billy Myers tapes, and one of those tapes has a UFO flying around a tree, and Bob Lazar says that's the one that convinced me that what Billy Myers saying was true.
It's
as
true,
far as physics.
But a lot of people, they say, oh, it's on a string, and but when you see the wide view and the pan back view, you can see that you have even a 200, 300-foot crane couldn't hold that thing up there. It
Exactly.
was really there.
You're 100% right. You're exactly right.
Now, here's the topic that it's going to change gears, but I'm wondering if it's related at all. JFK. Obviously, I've watching the Zapruder film. The bullet didn't come from the back. Just physics will tell you by his head bouncing backwards that the bullet came from somewhere near the front. Do you believe that E. Howard Hunt was the second gunman, which apparently a magazine in the 80s wrote about, a confession from him, and he sued for defamation and lost, which means that all he had to do was prove it was untrue, and he couldn't?
No, the bottom line with the JFK assassination was it was done by the Mossad, and it was commissioned by the Prime Minister of Israel. I'm trying to think, what was the Prime Minister's name in 1963? I'll remember in a second, but anyway, he commissioned Mossad, and the reason was JFK was insisting on inspecting Dimona. And Dimona was where the Israelis had constructed their atomic bombs, and it was very secret, and they went to a lot of trouble to keep it secret, and they didn't want any international authority or whoever inspecting their nuclear facilities. So Ben-Gurion was the prime minister. Ben-Gurion commissioned the Mossad get rid of him, and then Ben-Gurion resigned, being prime minister, and then 5 months later, Mossad killed him. Now, the way they did it is the CIA has been blamed for pulling off the assassination. They didn't pull it off, but they helped grease the skids. And the way they did it is James Angleton was the station chief in Rome when Israel was formed, and he was sent down to Israel in 1947, 1948, along with MI6, to help Israel form their own CIA. During that time, Angleton got hooked, and we don't know what it was that they got him on, but he turned and he became an Israel spy, a foreign spy. And when he got back to the United States in the early 50s, he was appointed as head of foreign intelligence. And his big deal was he was going to find the mole in the CIA because he was sure there was one. And the big joke was he was a mole, and he spent his entire career looking for the mole in the CIA. And finally, Colby fired him in 1972, and they didn't give a reason, but the reason was he was the mole, and he spent his entire career there searching for the mole. And he was the guy. He was passing all the information to Israel, and Israel passed it on to the Russians.
Chasing himself, basically, fakely. And what a perfect position. You being the mole, and you're also tasked with finding yourself. I mean, what a better cover than that.
Now, you're not actually like that in real life, are you, Mr. Lear?
What's that?
I'm saying, it's a perfect question, in context. You're not acting in that light, are you? Being a former sort of CIA worker and...
Well, I was a pilot, and they didn't tell pilots anything. And the only way I got to find anything was read it in the paper 10 years later.
You did some remarkable stuff, and that's why we call you the godfather of conspiracy. It has been a true honor to have you both again, Mr. Lear and Mr. Corbell. Of course, everybody, there's 4 important websites you have to check out. Of course, the upcoming documentary, Immaculate Deception. The website, of course, is immaculatedeception.com. If you want to speak to John Lear or email correspond with him, go to connectwithjohnlear.com. And if you want to see some amazing artwork from his daughter, JillLearArt.com, and of course more information on Mr. Corbell, JeremyCorbell.com. With that being said, thank you both. I'm going to leave you with the opportunity, Mr. Lear, to give everybody out there listening a final message. Anything you want to say?
Okay. All you have to do on Earth while you're here, and it's only for, it could be one lifetime, it could be more, but if you live your life with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed, and you express your love to your family, your immediate family, each and every day, you will get to graduate. And graduate means that when you die, you will get to go to heaven and stay there. Now, when you talk about heaven, any concept that you have to multiply exponentially by 1,000, and you have what heaven is really, and it's the 4th dimension. But remember that. Live your life with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed, and to express your love to your family each and every day.
You heard it all from the one and only John Lear and filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. This is Dr. J, Rome Radio, signing out.